Welcome everyone. So today I'm going to maybe start just, hi Melanie, just presenting Lorena super quick because obviously she has a big CV and you can actually Google her later on. But so Lorena is actually a research director and associate professor at the at Instituto de Estudios Avanzados en Educación from the Universidad de Chile. This is super weird saying something in Spanish and English at the same time. She's a sociologist and holds a PhD in education in the University of Oxford and a master's degree in education policy at the University of Melbourne. Her areas of interest are interpersonal relations in education and the application of quantitative methods to investigate equity issues in education. So probably a lot of us are going to be super interested on this research. And today I know that she's going to be presenting Looking Beyond Representation, Gender Inequalities in Research Attrition, Output, Leadership, and Collaboration in Chilean Education Researchers' Career Trajectories. So looking forward to this presentation. And as always, we have, so Lorena is going to be presenting, and then later on we are going to be having a Q&A. So obviously every comments, questions, suggestions are more than welcome. So Lorena, without further ado, I give you the stage.
Thank you so much, Francisca, for that kind introduction and for inviting me to present here at WiNS. I think it's the second time that I present in this seminar, and I enjoyed very much presenting I think it was last year or so. And I think this is a great way of kind of supporting and sharing the work that we do. And I think this particular talk can you might be able to relate to it, not only because of the application of social network analysis to a given area of study, but also because it talks about researchers and gender gaps in research trajectories. So I think that's something that we can all kind of relate or try to think about how this applies or not to our contexts and also to our fields of study. So as Francisca mentioned, this is a study titled Looking Beyond Representation, Gender Inequities Throughout Chilean Educational Researchers' Careers. We have a great team, and Francisca is part of that team, actually. So she's one of the co-authors of this paper that was recently published at the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education. So the team is composed by me, Carolina Guzmán, Matías Montero, Francisca Ortiz, and Diego Palacios. And we were supported very generously by different competitive grants from the Chilean government. So the context of this study is the broader gender disparities that we can see in different dimensions of researchers' careers, and that, according to the literature, are present even in highly feminized disciplines, such as education. So we know that these gender disparities in terms of, for example, research production, output, research dropout, first authorships and co-authorships are mainly investigated in STEM areas, where we see that the disparities in terms of representation, it's much more salient than in education and other areas that are usually have a larger percentage of women in their areas. So we thought it was interesting to look at how these gender gaps could function in highly feminized areas such as education. And we wanted to look at this like going from like the kind of like cross-sectional type of like photo diagnosis to more a longitudinal and life course perspective. I will let you know in a second what that means in our study. but the idea was to focus on the role of gender in shaping academic trajectories in educational research in Chile. And more specifically, we looked at these specific dimensions, which were research dropout, article publications, first authorship as an indication of leadership in research, and co-authorship as an indication of research collaboration, and how they developed throughout researchers' careers. And we know that the patterns of academic publication are embedded in geopolitical, institutional, disciplinary, and individual imbalances. And this leads usually to unequal research outputs and academic trajectories. So among the variables or predictors that are usually identified as strong predictors of research output, we can see that there are several individual characteristics, such as researchers' seniority or experience and position in their organization. Also, the discipline or field of study that we're looking at, gender. So these are the most commonly or frequently found predictors of research outputs. There is also plenty of evidence, mainly coming from the kind of global north, about how female researchers can face discrimination, unequal pay, and funding disparities. And this, of course, has an impact on their productivity, their promotion, and their careers. The mechanisms behind this are usually discussed into kind of different groups of explanations. So one of them has to do with the unequal division of academic labor, with women performing significantly more academic service than men, and also more teaching duties, and all the kind of like duties and labor that has to do with caring or supervising students, caring for others in their institution, so service and teaching and supervising, whereas men tend to have a kind of like a more protected space for developing their research. And there is also the explanation of different involvement in domestic and care work between male researchers and female researchers, which makes it more difficult, or it's a barrier for women to devote more time to research. So these increased gender gaps in research production, leadership, and collaboration have, of course, effects on academic promotion. So the research question for us was, how do the effects of gender on research dropout, article publication, leadership, and collaboration patterns manifest across the career life course of Chilean education researchers? For that, we had a large data set of more than 5,000 authors that published at least one regular or review article in Scopus indexed journals, classified into the subjects of education or developmental and educational psychology between the years of 2011 to 2021 inclusive. So, and they did so in affiliation to a Chilean institution. So we identified all of these authors that published during this period of time in this type of journals, and we retrieved all the information from their own research trajectories, even beyond that period of time. This is, of course, a bibliometric approach. We were able to access this through the Scopus API. So this is large, these were very large data sets that we were able to kind of clean and manipulate and analyze. So as I mentioned, we retrieved this data using the Scopus application programming interface, API, and we operated via the R Scopus package in R. There was a lot of cleaning and data preparation that had to be done before we could analyze this. we had to make sure that we were we were linking authors correctly within themselves. So publications within an author were correctly attributed to a given author. So that's author disambiguation. We also needed to extract the author's experience, which is also called in this field like academic age. And this is the years since the first article published in Scopus indexed education journals. That's how we defined experience. And we also needed to infer the author's gender based on the only information that we had that was their first name. So we did that through the genderizer package in R. And this package allows you to kind of infer the gender of a person based on their name and their country of origin, or country where they publish in this case. So we know that this is a limitation of our study. We were not able to ask authors about their how they identify themselves in terms of gender. So we only had this very kind of binary classification of authors. And what we did was we first described our data, then we used survival or duration models. The name depends on the field that you work, I learned. So survival models are very popular in medicine and health studies, whereas duration models, it's a more common name in sociology. But these are models that allow you to predict time to a given event based on different predictors. In this case, we were able to model months to research dropout and how gender was able to predict the time to dropout from research. Then we also use models for count data, more specifically Poisson regression models, to estimate or model the number of authorships and number of first authorships of these authors and how gender could predict that. And then finally, we use social network models, more specifically bipartite exponential random graph models, ERGMs, to study co-authorships. So the description of our data first, I think it's important to kind of like contextualize our field. We know from this and previous work that in Chile and in Latin America in general, the kind of like the research output, and more specifically the article published has increased very rapidly over the last decade. So we know that the number of authors, number of people publishing has increased very rapidly over time. This is the case in all Latin America, but particularly in Chile for different policies that have been promoting research in our country. And this is the case for most disciplines in social sciences and in humanities, but more so for education. So this is particularly interesting, a field that has been growing very quickly in terms of article production, article publishing, and also you can see that in the number of authors and how the field has grown from 2011 to 2021 in terms of the number of authors. And this has been the case, this rapid growth has happened both for female researchers and male researchers. So the number of our community has increased very quickly. But at the same time, if we look at the percentage of authors, we see that the gender composition has remained very stable, with the percentage of females being slightly lower than the percentage of males authors in education research in Chile. So we know that this kind of like it's been very, very stable, right? And then we could also look at how still very descriptively to look at gender homophily, if you wish, by looking at how the research teams are composed. So this is the percentage of articles and that were published by only male authorships or all male teams. That's the yellow line. Then we have all female teams. That's the lower black line. And then we have the mixed sex teams in green. So what we can see is that there's been an increase in the proportion of mixed sex teams in terms of like the group of authors of a given paper. But that has happened mainly because the high proportion of all male teams has decreased slightly over time. So we have these all male teams that were kind of like very a large proportion of the teams that publish in our field, and that has decreased somewhat, whereas the lower proportion of all female teams has remained more or less stable over time. So that's a first indication of a certain degree of homophily, gender homophily in our field. And then we looked at the gender gap in academic productivity. This is again using like chronological year, so historical trends of the gender gap in academic productivity, so average number of articles per year. And we see that we can see that the gender gap has tended to increase over time. So while both males and females have increased their kind of research productivity, males have done this in a more steeped rate or a slope. So the gap has increased. So like the typical Matthew effect that you see when the gaps are increasing over time. So that's what we first looked at, so historical trends. But we wanted to look at a time variable from a more of like a longitudinal life course type of study. So instead of looking at years in terms of historical time, we look at years in terms of experience. So how many years since the authors started to publish in Scopus education journals. And when we do that, we look at first the composition of our field. So now we can see that when authors start publishing, so very junior scholars or researchers start publishing, the composition is very similar in terms of male and female researchers. But as time, as the experience increases, so as they become more experienced researchers, the proportion of males starts to increase over time. And here, don't pay attention to this part because these are very few researchers who there are very few researchers who have more than 20 or 18 years of experience in our field. So most of our researchers are here, and we can see that there is a more unequal representation of females when we look at kind of like more senior researchers. So now to the study of research dropout. So we calculated the months to research dropout. This was the time, a time that we calculated after which we think the person left research, so they stopped publishing. And what we saw here was that in our duration or survival models, gender was a significant predictor of dropout risk. In other words, there was a significant effect of gender on survival probability to the detriment of women. More specifically, being a female researcher increases the dropout hazard by 21.5%. We can see that this gap occurs very early in their careers. So women are more likely to drop out after publishing, for example, their first article, and then this gap is not reversed afterwards. So what happens here at the beginning kind of determines the persistence of researchers in our field. So this is key. So what happens to female researchers after they publish their first article, for example, after their PhDs, and why do they leave? Why do they stop researching and publishing? This not necessarily means that they leave academia. They might still be academics or do kind of like teaching or different duties typical of the academic work, but they stop publishing, and that's very worrying. Then we look at gender gaps in article production and leadership across the career life course, and what we see here is these are the results of our Poisson models that predict research output, so the number of authorships per author. And what we see here is that effectively we have significant gender gaps in research output to the detriment of female junior researchers in particular. So we see that, well, when they start, they are very similar in terms of their productions, male and female researchers, but then as the experience grows or increases, we see this increasing gender gap in terms of a number of authorships. That then becomes non-significant later on, also because we have less precise estimations for these fewer researchers that are in this kind of like stage of their careers. But what we can see that both, so there is an inverted U shape to the predicted number of authorships, right? So for both male and female researchers, the predicted number of authorships increases over time and then drops. But this happens in a more steeped trend for male researchers compared to female researchers. So this is like the interaction effects that we see here as well that are significant. So the key here would be like the kind of like lower or kind of like diminished productivity of young or junior female researchers compared to their male peers with the same experience. And then we look at the same, but instead of looking just at authorships, we looked at first authorships, which is an indication of leadership. Particularly, I know that this can be different in different fields, but in education and social sciences, generally the first author would be the team leader, and also the corresponding author. So these two positions tend to agree. So the first authors are generally the corresponding authors as well. So we looked at whether there was gender differences in the participation as first authors, and we didn't find significant differences in that respect. And then we looked at gender academic collaboration patterns. So this is a collaboration for us. It's an indication, co-authorships is an indication of collaborations in this scenario. So we first looked at it using, again, Poisson models to predict research collaboration or research co-authorship. And we found that female researchers had fewer co-authorships. So this is only looking at articles that had more than one author. So female researchers had fewer co-authorships, and they were also more likely to engage in national collaborations, so publishing with other Chilean researchers, when compared to male researchers who tended to develop more of an international collaborative profile or publication profile. So male researchers were more likely to engage in regional collaboration, considering other authors in Latin America, and also they were more likely to collaborate with authors from the other regions of the world. Whereas female researchers stayed more local in terms of their co-authorships. We can see that trend here. So we know that co-authorships in general, so the number of co-authorships is higher for males, but also there is a certain pattern here where we see that for female researchers, national collaborations are kind of like more prominent, more substantive or more common. And now we looked at the social network models. I know that this is the main interest for you. And we had also Diego Palacios and Francisca, who are the SNA experts in our team, looking at different ways of modeling this. And we ended up using bipartite exponential random graph models, so ERGMs, to study co-authorships. So we focus here only in articles with between 2 and 10 authors. So we excluded 5% of our original sample of papers because some of them had only one author or more than 10, which was not very common in our field. And so we look at the nodes, 2 different levels. So our data structures had a multi-level kind of structure with authors in level 1 and articles in level 2. And well, we find satisfactory fit indicators for both the author and article levels. And we ended up presenting meta-analysis of results from models for each year. So we model separately the different years that we consider in our period of interest, and then we meta-analyze those results to get like the broader picture of effects. And some interesting effects from these ergoms were that women, again, have fewer co-authorships than men. We can see that here in the node factor gender effect. And we can also see that we predicted more co-authorships based on gender homophily. So there was a tendency to publish with authors of the same gender. So that's an indication of gender homophily that we found. We also found, and this is the kind of like the stability or the patterns for each one of the years that we consider from 2011 to 2021. We can see that there is a less precise estimation here at the beginning, but then we clearly see that there is a effect, a strong effect to the detriment of women towards the end of the period. And then we found that the effect of gender homophily, again, was less precise first, probably because of the lower number of articles that we had available at the beginning. So you can see here the number of authors and also the number of papers that we had in each year. And ties, of course, also increase over time. But all in all, we find that there is a significant gender homophily effect across the time period that we looked at. And then we also found, sorry, where is it? Here it is. We also found that more experienced researchers were more likely to participate in co-authorships. This is what we see here. So there is an effect of like the more experience you get, the more co-authorships you have. And we also found that there is an homophily based on academic age, in the sense that more senior researchers tend to collaborate with other senior researchers, and junior researchers tend to collaborate with junior researchers. So that's the homophily effect that we see here. So in conclusion, despite a similar initial representation, female educational researchers stopped publishing at a significantly earlier career stage than their male peers. So they have a 21.5% higher risk of research attrition. There is also a significant gender gap in academic productivity to the detriment of female junior researchers. So Chilean female researchers were found to publish on average 20.8% fewer articles than male researchers. In terms of research collaboration that we looked at by focusing on article co-authorships, we were able to see that female researchers present significantly fewer number of co-authorships, and this gap increases over time with research experience. Women were more likely to engage in national co-authorships than men, who tended to develop a more international collaboration profile. And of course, these disparities are likely to affect research visibility, impact, and promotion. We also found a significant level of gender homophily and research experience homophily. So education researchers in Chile are significantly more likely to collaborate with colleagues of the same gender and of similar research experience. And this has important implications, we think, because these homophily effects can limit the diversity of research teams and might also impede the diffusion of knowledge and innovation across different generations of Chilean education researchers. So I think that the main contributions of our study could be that we confirmed that even in highly feminized academic fields, women are overall more likely to be excluded from research and are more likely to be disadvantaged in terms of research output and collaboration. So if this happens in education, imagine what can happen in STEM and other more or less fields where women are less likely to participate. We use this quantitative multi-method approach to study gender effects on different dimensions of research trajectories. And so we wanted to look beyond cross-sectional gender representation data by using a longitudinal panel approach, which allowed us to explore how research trajectories are shaped by cumulative gender disparities or disadvantages. And also our social network analysis showed how our academic work is embedded in and structured around different social mechanisms related to gender, experience, and geopolitical effects. And the intersection between these social categories is also important. Of course, our study had several limitations. One of them is that we focus on Scopus indexed education journals only. This decision had to do with the comparison of coverage that we found in that Scopus had a much broader, larger scope than Web of Science articles. But we know that we didn't look, of course, at all types of scholarly publications that are important. We didn't look at books. We didn't look at journals that were indexed in other databases like Cielo, which is particularly important in Latin America, or other type of indexations. But we know from previous literature that gender gaps could be even more pronounced in elite academic sources and selective or more selective indexing databases such as Web of Science indexed journals. So in a way, we're perhaps underestimating gender gaps with this Scopus sample. And then we did not explore important intersectionalities between gender and contextual or institutional inequalities. This was mainly kind of like a limitation of our data. It is very difficult to attribute affiliation to a given university or organization over time for each one of the authors in our database. This is because basically authors sort of name their affiliation in different ways. Even the same institution is named in different ways and at different levels. So some people report their faculty name and also the university name, others only the university name, and that makes it really difficult to kind of identify the institution for each one of the individuals. And also we approach gender research disparities from a longitudinal perspective, but we didn't disentangle historical effects from those of cohort effects. And I think this could be interesting. Unfortunately, for kind of like data limitations in terms of sample, we didn't do this separate analysis for a younger cohort versus an older cohort, and to see whether there has been any changes in terms of like historical changes in the way the field is kind of shaped by these variables. That will be something interesting to look at in the future. But we still think that there are several important policy implications from this study, in particularly the relevance of implementing affirmative action policies that can promote the retention of junior female researchers, as well as their research productivity and international collaboration opportunities for women in education research. We think that research funding agencies and institutions should promote and explicitly favor gender and experience diverse research teams to make sure that knowledge is kind of like transferred and diffused, and innovation is also more likely to occur. We know that that's the case when we have diverse research teams. So we think it's important to promote that diversity in our field. And also higher education institutions should monitor the distribution of academic work and the kind of like the gendered distribution of academic work, and also promote more gender equal engagement in research, teaching, and service duties. And we think that these initiatives will not only benefit female researchers, but advance the field more broadly by promoting research productivity as well as diversity and equity in knowledge production. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much for the invitation to present at this workshop. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to also learn more about you. So I'm very happy to answer questions or discuss further these topics and see also how these ideas relate to your own experiences, which I think it's also interesting. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for your very interesting talk. And now it's time for the Q&A. If people have questions, please raise your hands. Otherwise, there is a question from the chat. I don't know if you can read it. I can read it for you if you want. So there is a question from Eva, and she's asking, why are you including academic age in some contests? It would be bad for junior researchers to publish with seniors, as the latter will get credit. Given the apparently high feminization of education research also in Chile, there wouldn't be a problem with having too few old young women collaborate with? That's the question.
That's a really good question. Yeah, there is this, I think in different contexts, we can see that there are certain benefits and also certain kind of like unintended consequences of publishing with more senior researchers. So some people will say that that gives you more visibility, that it's more likely, you're more likely to be cited if you have a very senior author in your team, and that's probably true. But at the same time, as Eva mentioned, they tend to be more likely to get the credit, or they are more likely sometimes to appear as first authors because they sometimes contribute with the funding of the projects, etc. So that's an interesting question. I also think that that's mainly the reason why we see that there is kind of like experience and gender homophily in our sample. This might be like some sort of strategies that researchers try to kind of like use to kind of like protect themselves, or like kind of be able to work in spaces that are more friendly spaces for them, or that are more kind of like productive for them. And in that sense, it makes sense that women tend to collaborate with other women, although that's not more frequent than men collaborating with other men in our field. And it also makes sense that they tend to kind of like publish, they're more likely to publish with researchers from a similar age. So yeah, there are pros and cons, I think, of both strategies. I'm trying to figure out what I think is best, and I'm also kind of like driving towards homophily in my own practice, I guess. I find that in my own experience, I'm happier and kind of like more productive working in collaboration with other female researchers. I think that the distribution of work is more equitable, and also with more junior researchers. I think the way of collaborating and the kind of like the distribution of work is more equitable. But that's my experience. I don't know, maybe some people will think that the benefits of collaborating with more senior researchers outweighed the cons. So yeah.
Thanks for the answer. Do we have other questions? I have one. So I was wondering, when you consider mixed gender publications, do you see any difference if, let's say, there are 5 men and 1 woman, or yeah, more mixed? So if the percentage is different, something like that?
We believe that would be the case. So we run those analyses, and we didn't see a very strong difference in terms of patterns of co-authorship and production when we only focus on collaborative articles. And we also had a couple of descriptive statistics. I don't have them here right now, but I think they are mentioned in the paper, where we look at the number or the proportion of females and males within those teams. We didn't find very significant differences in that regard. So it's not necessarily the case that when we have mixed teams, there is only one female researcher and several male researchers. It's usually more balanced. Thank you, Elena.
Okay, thanks for the answer. Any other questions from the audience? I don't see any other question.
I have a question. Hi, Lorena. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I'm And I'm so sorry, I'm constantly asking questions that may not have to do a lot with what you just presented, but that was really like initiated with what you just presented, and feel that I'm constantly looking to the next PhD. I cannot even keep up with the one I'm trying to finish right now. So the question I have is in terms of academic orientation, we tend to, like what you described is just beautifully, because it shows us what we see in gender inequities, but in academic environments. But also, I am wondering if you have identified some gender homophily effect in other aspects of academic work. And here in the US, we talk about the invisible work that many women in academia are carrying, right? Like they're doing more mentorship, they're doing more admin kind of work. So I wonder if there's another picture that complements what we see, because we only have 24 hours a day, right? We can only sustain so many relationships. So how women actually have a broader impact in academia that's usually not seen. So that was, I was wondering if you have some like ideas on that to connect, say like, yeah, women are not publishing because they're doing all of this other work that keeps this big machine going. So that was one thing. And the other thing was in terms of life course. I wonder if through this the longevity of the time that you studied, if you have seen some kind of external influences that may lead to different trajectories. So when this law passed, then we saw a shift in academic publications, or the ways in which negotiations of roles and power happen in the academic spaces based on impacts that are coming from the outside. Because I'm thinking if we're going to be talking about influencing policies that will promote a more equity in the academic space, then what are the kind of policies that in the past have actually had like an impact that will positively like influence that diversity in the space? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulina. These are great questions. I'll try to answer to some of them. So the last one about kind of like maybe certain associations with policies that the country has implemented. I didn't stop to talk about this in the presentation, but we saw that at least for junior researchers, the probability of engaging in international collaborations was more equal, in the sense that junior female researchers were almost as likely as male researchers to publish with authors who were not based in Chile. And I think that might relate to the policies that the country has implemented for already, I think, more than a decade. These are scholarships to study abroad, to study master's degrees and doctoral degrees in at the best universities or more prestigious universities worldwide. And I think that kind of talks to me about how now more junior researchers are more likely to collaborate, with authors from those universities, their former supervisors or other networks that they might have developed, compared to the larger differences and kind of collaboration profiles that we see among senior researchers, where we do see this stronger, like larger gap with female researchers more likely to collaborate locally. So that's one thing that we also saw in more of the historical trend, that there are some increasing gaps that might have to do with the pandemic as well. We know how the pandemic affected academic work and how it affected female researchers more than male researchers in terms of the productivity, etc. So I think that's we capture some evidence of that, yeah, the mechanisms behind these gender disparities, which was your first question, I think it's very important to think about those based on the previous literature and some qualitative studies that have been conducted in Chile. We know that the unequal distribution of academic labor, it's one of the main reasons for these gender gaps that we see in research. So women definitely more likely to work or to be kind of like asked to perform roles as supervisors, mentors, lecturers. Also, they engage more in kind of like service, kind of like the development of the organization more broadly, whereas men are more likely to protect that research space. And at least in Chile, that research space is extremely valuable because the promotion of in the academic careers, it's mainly based on that, on the number of publications in certain kind of like indexed journals, and also the funding for research is also strongly based on your previous publication kind of like history. So I think it's like a reproduction of this inequality that we see over time in these trajectories. So yeah, that's what I can say about that. That's definitely one of the main mechanisms behind this. We were not able to test them, but we know that they are present in different contexts. Thank you, Paulina. I forgot to mention that I left in the chat, I left the webpage where you can download these papers. So if you want to have a look at it in more detail, you can access it through that link.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks, Lorena. Very interesting to see, not only from a research point of view, to see what is happening with our country and our fields, kind of to see. So very interesting. I was wondering this disparity with the collaboration networks that you mentioned. So if I understood correctly the methodology, you guys identify the first Scopus publication, and then from that baseline, you follow the people, right? That's a bit the... So that first Scopus, in which year? Because maybe you guys are picking up already established long-lasting relations that maybe women, because of some elements, you don't see their early relationships. So there's something with the timing that maybe can be modulating or not your results, or maybe it's reflecting that in reality women tend to focus more in the country and not outside of the country. So that's what I was wondering. I don't know if it's good. If you can understand this correctly,
Yeah,
sorry.
I think so. And you will see, maybe if you look at the paper, you will see more details,
yeah.
decisions that we made, because this was a key issue. So one of the things that we did is that we didn't consider people who publish only once in these journals, because we have people who maybe collaborate as a methodologist and then they leave because they are publishing in other areas. So we wanted to get rid of that people, those visitors that come and go. So that was one of the decisions that we made. We excluded those who had only one collaboration, I think, in this field. And we also, as you mentioned, we first identify the authors who publish during this period of time, so between 2011 and 2021. And then for each one of those authors that we identified, we went and looked at their entire publication history in Scopus. So that allowed us to pick up both very senior and very kind of like junior authors, going beyond, you know, the period in which we used to identify authors. And in terms of survival analysis, we calculated kind of like, well, this is censored data in the sense that some people leave at some point because they retire or because they die or because they... So we had to kind of like control for that, and then to establish a certain period after which we think the person dropped out, so stopped publishing. So it was not like, I don't remember the exact number, but not publishing for 1 year or 2 years, but then they come back. So we wanted to still capture that. And for that reason, we established a larger period of time in which if people didn't show up again, then it means that they drop out from research. And I think that gives us, of course, a restricted idea of academic work because we're only looking at publishing, but at the same time, as a consequence of these policies that I mentioned earlier, that had as a consequence that many people are coming back with their PhDs from very prestigious universities, and they are kind of like very eager to start kind of working in academia, but at the same time, the academic positions have not increased significantly over the last years. So we have several researchers who have very kind of like unstable work, even though they have like a very strong degree and they are kind of very competitive, but they still haven't been hired as an academic. So by looking at the publication, we can still capture those junior researchers who are still kind of trying to make it into academia perhaps, and are kind of like active in publishing, but then after a while they might decide to leave. So it's even, I think it's richer data than looking at the administrative data from universities, for example, that give us kind of like more of a picture of the ones who made it, the ones who kind of like ended up with an academic position. Thank you,
No,
Melanie. Great question.
sorry, in the same thing, the nationalities, you guys just use the affiliation then, right? The one that you say. So,
Exactly.
So
okay. we weren't able to actually kind of like disambiguate the number of the name, sorry, of the institution, but we had the country of the institution. So it's not necessarily that, you were born in Chile, but you published with an affiliation to a Chilean institution. Not necessarily a university, it could also be other type of organization, but that was the way in which we identify kind of like Chilean researchers, not based on, their citizenship or their country of birth, but more in terms of their affiliation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
I have a question related to this question, in a sense. So how did you disambiguate, make in the paper for sure, it's very, very well described, but for example, if I move to another university, will you still recognize me as the same person or no? That's a question.
That's a very tricky issue in bibliometric work. We were lucky enough that we had that Scopus has an ID for each author, and that ID tends to kind of like travel with the author through different universities. But we also, apart from using that ID, we also checked, name coincidences and kind of like more manually, if you wish, to see whether there were some authors that were not picked up with the same ID, but they were actually the same person. So I think that was the kind of like what took us longer to try and clean those data sets and make sure that we were actually attributing journals to the same person if they were authored by the same person.
Okay,
we learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite hard because only the name is not enough. But if you also use the affiliation, that can change. So, okay.
Yeah, it's very tricky, very messy data.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions. So let's thank again Lorena for this very interesting talk. And yeah, thanks a lot, and see you in 2 weeks for the next seminar.
Thank you very much, Elena and Francisca, for organizing this workshop, this session.